Captain Peter Cutsie in South Korea, and this is my briefing room. Tonight, part 3 of the engine separation after V1. As we mentioned in the last part 2, tonight we're going to strictly cover the checklist for the one engine inoperative landing checklist. So we'll go to it. And here it is here. So the condition, and remember, this is the last checklist that you're going to do. If you're returning to land from your departure airport, as mentioned before, you would have done all the other checklists and left this checklist for the last. And if you're going en route because you can't return, then you wouldn't do the one engine inoperative landing checklist till you got closer to your destination. So the condition is landing must be made with one engine inoperative and set flaps 15 landing, set VREF 15 or VREF ice. So the pilot monitoring would read each one of these items and pause, of course, to make sure that the pilot flying understands each one. And if any one of these applied, then you'd have to set VREF ice. So it's important you do that. And normally when you're setting up, you would do this at this time. You'd actually set your FMC CDU with VREF 15 or VREF 15 plus ice. And it's any one of these. If engine anti-ice will be used during the landing, so you have to know the weather at your destination, which you would. Or wing anti-ice has been used at any time during the flight. Or icing conditions were encountered during the flight and landing temperature is below 10 degrees. And remember, if any of the following conditions apply. So remember, when VREF ice is needed, the wind additive should not exceed 5 knots. As you know, the standard wind additive for a Boeing airplane, 737, is half the steady state headwind component, minimum of 5, maximum of 20. So if you're already adding 10 knots, then your maximum can only be 5 knots on top of that. All right. Check the non-normal landing configuration distance tables. Well, I so happen to have had that set up here, and you should have it bookmarked in your iQRH or know where to go quickly for any flight so that you're not wasting time trying to find it. Now, the thing I wanted to point out here is, here it is here, one engine inoperative landing and flaps 15 with the reference of VREF 15. And the distances, remember, are in meters. So if you're using feet, you have to convert for it. So the landing weight in kilos and the distance in meters. And your altitude adjustment is here. So you would go through it and remember the notes with respect to the asterisks here. It takes you down to the asterisks here for landing distance at or below 8,000 feet pressure altitude. Apply the standard adjustment. For altitudes higher than 8,000 feet, first apply the standard adjustment to derive a new reference base, and then apply the high adjustment. And then remember, the high adjustment is over here. The standard is here, and the high is here. All right. So let's go back to the checklist as we're reading it. So you've looked at the distance tables and maintain VREF 15 plus wind additive or VREF ice plus wind additive on final. The minimum wind additive is 5 knots. Remember that. When engine anti-ice is needed, use the operating engine only. Of course, the engine that's not operating, you don't turn on the engine anti-ice. Now, you would do the checklist down to this point because you have to set the airplane up for landing. So when calling for the one engine inoperative landing checklist, call for it as one engine inoperative landing checklist down to deferred item to trigger the pilot monitoring, not to go beyond that, because you have to do the setup, FMC setup for the approach, and you have to give the approach briefing. That's the reason why. And when you're finished that, and who does what is up to your company's SOPs will dictate who actually does the FMC setup. Normally, the way to do it, and I think the way to do it, is pilot flying would give the pilot monitoring control while the pilot flying gives the briefing. In other words, pilot flying fly the airplane, pilot monitoring would set up the FMC CDU, then the pilot flying would give control to the pilot monitoring and the radios, and he or she would now be the new pilot flying, while the pilot monitoring, the person who's going to do the approach, will actually check the FMC, make sure it's correct, and then give the approach briefing, then take control back as the actual pilot flying. And that, I suggest, is a good method. In any case, different companies have different standard operating procedures with respect to that, so you follow your company SOPs. Then, when those two items are done, the setup and the approach, the pilot flying will now call for one engine inoperative landing checklist at deferred items. That's a suggestion to remind everybody that you've got to do a descent checklist, an approach checklist, and a landing checklist. And they're not done from the normal checklists, they're done from the QRH. So you do them and set them up, and here they are here. And if for any reason you want to additional power on a go-around, it may be a hot day and you may be heavy, you would go to the no engine bleed landing below. And the no engine bleed landing, when below 10,000 feet, wing anti-ice off, isolation switch closed, bleed one air switch off, which will give you more thrust in the event of a go-around. All right, now that's important. APU bleed, switch on, left pack switch auto, and bleed 2 air switch off. So that is the no engine bleed landing. Now remember, if you're at a high altitude airport and you're below 10,000 feet, but your airport elevation is, let's say, 5,500 feet, then you're going around and you're cleaning up. Remember, you're going to have to get your pressurization back established before you climb through 10,000 feet. And at a high altitude airport, even say at that, the 7,000 or 8,000 foot airport, you're going to be well in over 10,000 feet very quickly, maybe even with flaps extended. So you've got to make sure that the aircraft is pressurized. That is, you've got to make sure you repressurize the airplane. You've got all the bleeds off. Now, the APU bleed valve, the APU itself will be pressurizing the airplane because the engine bleeds are off. The APU is running. So this no engine bleed landing is actually turning off the engine bleeds to give you more thrust. But the APU is operating, pressurizing the airplane. But when you're at high altitude airports and you're climbing above 10,000 feet, remember your configuration with the packs, where they are and where your pressurization controls are. It's very important. So you may need to do this at high altitude airports on hot days. Your captain and you will make that decision. And now here's a go-around procedure review. So do the normal go-around procedure, except use flaps 1. So go around flaps 1, positive rate, gear up, if, in fact, you can get the gear up. If you separated engine 1, you make sure in your briefing you don't call for the gear up, because you can't get the gear up. And you don't want to be touching the gear lever. So that has to be part of your briefing. And if you've separated number 2, then you can, in fact, get gear up, but you're not going to be able to raise leading edge flaps. So you have to brief about that. You can retract your trailing edge flaps. And remember your maximum speed with flaps extended, 230 knots. And remember your maximum altitude, flight level 200. So the go-around procedure review has really got to be professionally done and spent time talking about it. Now, I've done a briefing on a go-around procedure, and you want to have a look at that before you come to this part of the go-around review. Go around, make sure go around thrust is set, make sure it's enunciated on the FMA, and make sure the thrust is set and the pitch attitude is set before you say flaps 1. So go around, set go around thrust and make sure that it's set, and then call for flaps 1, and then the positive rate, and then depending on which engine is separated, gear up or no gear up. So you have to spend time, and your instructor will spend time in the simulator doing a go around with you. And also, if you're at a high altitude airport and you're training, you certainly want to ensure that you try a no engine bleed approach and landing, because your pressurization is set up differently. Remember, the APU is pressurizing the airplane. So that's why I wanted to discuss this by itself as part 3. So the approach checklist, and then the additional deferred items, ground proximity flap inhibit, and then the landing checklist. And then the checklist is complete. And remember now, the landing checklist is not going to be completed until you get your gear down. And if you're actually separated on engine number 1, it's going to be a manual gear extension. So you've got to do the manual gear extension before you can do this portion of the one engine inoperative landing. So that's why it's important to do the one engine inoperative landing checklist down to deferred items first, get the airplane ready, and then when you give your briefing, really brief on the go-around procedure. Because in most cases in your lifetime, you probably will only do a few normal go-arounds, let alone a non-normal go-around. So you want to be super prepared for this. That's why I do these briefings, to give you a chance to think before you go into your real-time briefing with your instructor in the simulator. So I hope this part 3 has been helpful. Please go to my go-around briefing in the package. It's quite extensive, and it's important that you have a good look at it and ensure that go-around thrust is set. Boeing's FCTM is quite correct when they say go around flaps 15, positive rate gear up for a normal operation, 2-engine operation, or go around flaps 1, positive rate gear up if you can get the gear up for an engine out operation. That is correct. Nothing wrong with the FCTM. It's perfectly right. But how you make those things happen is important. One of the most critical things in aviation, accidents and incidents, were pilots not knowing how to conduct a go-around, and especially a go-around from level flight. And that's something I'll discuss in a future briefing. All right, thanks for watching. Information is on the screen if you want to contact me to take part in a briefing with a partner or by yourself. And it's all uploaded into a special folder, your special folder in Google Drive, so you can review it before your briefing. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in my next video.